Hello, welcome to the Auditory Learner. We are going to be doing today a study guide audio for pharmacology, and we will begin with chapter 1. Chapter 1 involves what drugs are and how they're used, how drugs are made and regulated, and the prescriptions. All right, so let's begin first um, with what are drugs and how they're used. So for the lecture quiz Q&A, there was 2 questions, and the answers were basically that heroin is a recreational drug, and its recreational drugs are a Schedule 1 drug, which means they are used for pleasure and not for treatment. Drugs have a complex route of administration, such as injections, which require a prescription. Supplements and things that are extracted from plants and herbs uh, do not require a prescription. Great. So, what are drugs? Drugs are chemical substances to treat diseases, disorders, and illnesses, which include herbal supplements, vitamins, and minerals. Pharmacy is the social and economic aspects of drugs, which involve preparing and dispensing. Toxins, that is the chemicals that cause deleterious effects, which involve toxicology. Adverse effects are unwanted effects of drugs, also known as side effects. And then we have inactive ingredients, which are dyes, buffers, and preservatives. Now, a history of where drugs came from. Basically, it started with animals and humans. We noticed that animals such as elephants would eat ripe fruit called marula, and they would get drunk off the eating the ripe fruit. And then also there are recipes, herbal recipes that date back to the ancient Sumerians, which is about 5,000 years ago. Let's get into brand names versus generic names. So before we get into more detail of that, I just want to say that the patent process for drugs in the US is about 20 years. The US allows for a 20-year exclusivity for companies except for over-the-counter drugs. Now, brand names are Tylenol, Percocet, Wegovy, Advil. Brand names are often newer, and insurances will not cover the cost for brand names. Generic names are usually only one name, such as acetaminophen, ibuprofen, or oxycodone. By the way, the chemical name for ibuprofen is p-isobutylphenyl, and it's a propionic acid. We will go into that later on. So there we go. Brand names are Tylenol, Percocet, Wegovy. Generic names are acetaminophen, ibuprofen, oxycodone. So older drugs with expired patents are often cheaper. Chemically, generic names are also chemically and biologically equivalent as brand names. However, they may have inactive ingredients, which may vary, and insurance may enforce the use of generic types, probably because they are cheaper. And also, generic types can be compounded over the counter, such as Dayquil, which combines acetaminophen, uh, dextromethorphan, which is Robitussin, and phenylephrine, which is Sudafed. So generics can be compounded over the counter, such as Dayquil, which combines those 3 drugs. So make sure we know what brand names and generic names are. Make sure you know that insurance companies will often not cover brand names, but they will cover generic names. The types of drugs are prescriptions and non-prescription. Prescription requires, obviously, a pharmacist to dispense. And these drugs often have side effects, and they have complex routes of administration. And prescription drugs are usually covered by insurance. Then there's non-prescription drugs, which are also called over-the-counter drugs, which have, once they become non-prescription over-the-counter, they have a longer history of safety, and they're usually not covered by insurance. So some examples of these are herbal drugs, supplements, and um, Tylenol or Advil, which we know that Tylenol and Advil is a brand name, and the generic name for Tylenol and Advil is acetaminophen and ibuprofen, which have been in the world for a very long time. But insurance companies will cover the generic, not the brand name of non-prescription over the counters. Now, let's go into how drugs are made and regulated. So, the FDA is the main regulator of drugs in the US, which control the safety and efficacy, such as drug recalls and black box warnings. New drugs must be approved by the FDA, but herbal supplements are not heavily regulated. So, labeled use means that it's FDA approved. Off-labeled use means that it's not FDA approved. And the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, are the ones who enforce the laws uh, behind these drugs. Now, let's talk about the drug approval process. There are 4 phases, and it takes about 10 to 15 years. The first phase, which is phase 1, the preclinical phase, takes 3 years, and that involves the discovery, the animal studies, and an investigational new drug application. An INDA, I-N-D-A, must be submitted. That's for phase 1, the preclinical one. For phase 2, which is the clinical phase, that's about 6 years. Now, within phase 2, there are 3 phases, which are the first one, small doses are tested on humans for safety determination. Second one is larger group of humans are tested for effectiveness. And then the third one of phase 2 is national recruitment, testing those with illness for the treatment. And that takes 6 years. So again, just to review, there are 4 phases that we're talking about here. We just went over phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 is the preclinical, takes 3 years, and they have to submit all the information, which goes into the INDA application. Phase 2 takes about 6 years, and there's 3 phases in phase 2. Small doses to humans, larger groups of humans for effectiveness, and then national recruitment to treat those with illness. Now, the last 2 phases of the drug approval process are phase 3, which is when the company submits an NDA, which is a new drug application, and must be approved. Once that's approved, there must be a phase 4, which is post-market surveillance with monitoring of patients for undetected adverse effects, which includes surveys. And usually about 90% of drug candidates fail. So again, phase 1, 2, 3, 4. Phase 2 is the only one that has 3 subphases, which is testing on humans from a smaller group to larger group, then national to treat those with illness. And then phase 3 is the NDA application. The new drug application is submitted, and then it must be approved. And then phase 4, post-market surveillance. Okay. All right. Let's remember that. Orphan drugs. What are orphan drugs? Orphan drugs, they treat conditions with less than 200,000 people affected in the United States. So there's low profit potential. So there's a need for grants and financial support. So orphan drugs are basically harder to fund because of the low profit potential. And an example of this is Kalydeco for cystic fibrosis, because there are less than 20,000 people who are affected. Now let's talk about who can prescribe drugs. Those are MDs, DOs, and dentists. Those are main people who can prescribe drugs, scheduled drugs. The mid-level people who prescribe drugs are PAs, NPs, ODs, RPHs, and psychologists. So I'm assuming it's physician assistant, nurse practitioner, OD, and RPH. Not sure what that is. All right, let's go into what polypharmacy is. Polypharmacy is a multiple medication, is when multiple medications are used for one disease or multiple meds for multiple diseases. The reason for polypharmacy is because there's poor coordination between the person's primary care physician and an increase of access to concierge healthcare or telemedicine for people who need or want ED drugs, erectile dysfunction drugs. So this creates adverse effects, and that's why there are certain acts and laws to pass through legislation. One of these are called the Cures Act, Controlled Substance Utilization Review System. So that prevents polypharmacy of controlled substances in California. Then there's the Harrison Narcotic Act of 1914, which was amended again in 1937, and that governs opium, cocaine, and marijuana. All right, let's talk about the schedule of drugs. There's a total of 5 schedules of drugs. Okay. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The first one, we're going to use the acronym of HELM, HELM, because the first schedule of drugs is the highest abuse potential, and that includes heroin, ecstasy, LSD, and marijuana. That's Schedule 1, HELM. Schedule 2, not the highest, but high abuse potential. That includes cocaine, hydrocodone, hydromorphone, amphetamines, methamphetamines, methadone, and pentobarbital. We're going to go with the acronym of CHAMP. So Schedule 2 is CHAMP. Schedule 3, it's a moderate abuse potential. That's testosterone, acetaminophen, codeine, ketamine, and anabolic and steroids. We're going to go at TAX for that one, for testosterone, acetaminophen, codeine, ketamine, and steroids. And the last, well, not the last, 4 is the less abuse for potential. Is you got the PAMs, so diazepam and Ultram, which is tramadol or Valium. Diazepam, Valium, tramadol, Ultram. So we're going to call Schedule 4 PAMs. Schedule 5 are the least abuse potential. That's codeine, cough syrup. So just a quick review. Schedule 1 is HELM, highest abuse potential. Schedule 2 is CHAMP, which is high but not the highest. Schedule 3 is TAX, moderate abuse potential. Schedule 4 is PAMS, which is a less abuse potential, and the least abuse potential is Schedule 5, which is codeine cough syrups. We'll just call it promethazine or something like that. All right, so 1 HELM, 2 CHAMPs, 3 TAX, 4 PAMs, 5 codeine cough syrups. And it starts with the highest down to the least abusive. Okay. In California, all prescriptions must be electronically submitted. No more handwrittens. Also, what is a formulary? That is a list of drugs that insurance companies will cover. Let's talk about prescriptions now. Okay, so prescriptions. When you read a prescription, there's a heading, a body, and a closing. In the heading, you're going to have the license number of the practitioner, the NPI number, and the patient information. Then in the body, we're going to have the RX symbol and the prescription symbols or names and the amount in the metric system. And then in the closing part of the prescription, we're going to have the signature of the prescriber and any substitutions, if any are allowed, any refills, and the DEA number. Okay. So the heading contains who's prescribing it and who is it going to. The body contains the drug and the prescription and the amount. The closing is the signature and what is allowed for that prescription. All right, so also let's get into the nitty-gritty of the abbreviations. All right, so I didn't put all of them, just put the ones that I feel are the most important. So we're going to go with AC before meals, PC after meals, AA, which means applied to affected area. AD is as much as desired. So don't get that confused with PRN, which is as needed. So there's a difference between as much as desired and as needed, apparently. BID, twice a day. HS, at bedtime. PO, by mouth. Q, every, which means there might be Q12 or Q1 to 2. So if it's Q12, it means every 12 hours, or if it's Q1 to 2, it's every 1 to 2 hours. QD means every day. QW means every week. QID means 4 times a day. Stat means now. TID means 3 times a day. UD means as directed. And X10D means for 10 days. Yes. So we've defined a basic terminology, explained how drugs arose, compare and contrast different types of drugs. We talked about what a brand name and generic names and what that is, the roles of FDA and DEA, the process of drug approval, what an orphan drug is, what polypharmacy is, what the schedules are, and also the prescription process and certain terms that we just went over, and also ways of interpreting and writing prescriptions. One last thing that I'm going to end this video on is going to be the symbols for the amount of drugs taken. So if we have, the amount like tablets, for example, and in that, we're going to, for example, we're going to be doing what is called, let's say we have a T with 1 dot on top that equals 1 tablet. Um, uh, 2 T's or a line with 2 dots and 2 lines going down, that's 2. Then you have the 3 dots, that's 3. Then the 4 dots, that's 4. So every time there's a dot, basically that's 1, 2 dots, 2, 3 dots, 3, 4 dots, 4. Okay, so in an example, if we see 3 dots on top of on top of 3 T's, that means 3 tabs. Okay, all right. So here we go as an example. So if we have the 3 dotted T's and it says tab POQ12, that's going to mean that you're going to take 3 tabs by mouth every 12 hours. Okay. And WF with food. Okay. So let's add that one there. WF equals with food. Okay. So let's review that one more time. You have the 3 T's with the tab POQ12WF. That means 3 tabs by mouth every 12 hours with food. Another one example would be 5 milliliters POPRNHS. That's going to mean you're going to take 5 milliliters by mouth as needed at bedtime. Okay, for anxiety. All right, so that's POPRNHS. Again, that is by mouth as needed HS at bedtime. Okay. The next one, we have 0.25 milliliters IMQW. So that is an injection of 0.25 millimeters intramuscularly every week. Okay. So that's whatever the amount of the injection, because IM is intramuscular, QW. So every week. All right. Then we're going to have like a cream that if they prescribe a cream, it's going to be AA ad lib. So that's going to be apply to affected area as much as desired. And lib, I'm going to say that's liberally, as liberal as you want. I'm probably wrong. Another example is going to be if it says div 1 dotted T tab TID PO PC X30D. So what that means is you're going to divide one tablet, okay, 3 times a day by mouth, okay, and PC by mouth after meals. Okay, so that one's a little tricky. Let's make sure we got that one. So div one dotted T tab TID PO PC X30D. Okay, so the one divide one tablet 3 times a day by mouth. Okay, by mouth after meals for 30 days. Okay, TID POPC. TID 3 times a day. PO by mouth. PC is after meals. Am I correct there? PC is after meals. Yes, I am correct. All right, that's a tricky one. Great. Um, so let's make sure we understand all this. Very good. We're going to end it for the chapter 1 lectures here, and then we'll do the next ones. The next one will be chapters 2 and 3 lectures. Thank you.